Hello and welcome to the 7th Lights Out Racing podcast for our coverage of the Monaco Grand Prix. So that will take us straight into the news roundup, and the first story we'll be looking at is Honda's return, and we've got some more confirmed details about that.
And coming up after that, we'll be discussing the divisive opinion over across the top teams regarding the upcoming Pirelli tyre changes.
And the third story we'll be looking at is the breaking news of the weekend. That is Mercedes have been able to conduct secret tyre testing with Pirelli.
Okay, now into the news roundup, and our first story is to discuss the Honda return to F1, most notably and first official confirmed with McLaren.
Yep, that's it. They'll be definitely now supplying engines to McLaren in 2015 onwards, and it's also come out as well as part of that announcement that it's not going to be an exclusive deal with McLaren.
So other teams could be having it as well, and it's interesting that I think if I certainly get a bit nostalgic about it, that's certainly the partnership that I remember the most, Prost and Senna days, and where they had the most success.
Yeah.
Obviously, the sport's very different now, but it would certainly be interesting to see what kind of engine Honda will produce and how that competes with the Mercedes engine. It does seem, doesn't it, that suppliers are going down their specific work team routes now. There seems to be fewer and fewer partnerships as such, apart from perhaps Renault and Red Bull and Lotus. That what I'm saying is that I notice a lot of work teams like the Mercedes are just providing their own engines, and then Honda will provide the McLarens and perhaps others. And it seems like a straight 3-4 way fight next year: Honda, Ferrari, and Renault and Mercedes.
Yeah, that's it. And another thing that did come up out of this as well, they might be having a bit of a switch around with some of the other teams as well. Like say, they're kind of aligning the manufacturers with the with their own teams. Like say, Mercedes supply Mercedes and things like that. And something else that did come out from that as well is not only have we got all the suppliers at the minute making the engines as they are, but when Honda come in, they'll be starting from everybody will be starting from scratch as well. So there's not going to be Mercedes are going to get the advantage of having a Mercedes engine that's been running for years as well. It's almost like taking it back to step one again. Because I think when Cosworth came in, they started off on the back foot, didn't they? So they were trying to build an engine that everyone else had a lot of experience on. But now with these ones, because it's the 2015 regulations, Honda are going to be coming back in. The engines are going to be brand new. Everyone's going to be starting from an even thing. So there won't be that advantage of, like, say, everybody knowing what everybody's doing.
I know what you're saying, but I'm wondering, is there still a slight advantage with the current engine manufacturers who have been in the sport for so long that, yes, absolutely, there's big regulation changes, but do you think it would give any assistance at all to the likes of Renault, Mercedes and Ferrari for the next couple of years, at least that I understand they're all working from scratch on new regulations, but is there something that they could still take from the previous seasons?
Maybe a little in the way that just generally Formula One works, but I don't think there's going to be a massive advantage. If it is, it's a very, very tiny thing that will probably be caught up maybe within a few races, but probably one of the big things we're going to be looking at is because they're not coming back till 2015, everyone's going to have a year up on them with 2014, so that's going to be the only advantage they're going to have, but they're going to have maybe a year's advantage, but you can guarantee that Honda will already be designing something next year, looking at all the current regulations. So the fact that it's been announced now before 2014 gives them that time. All they're not going to get is that proper F1 running time, if you like. They're going to get all the build up and all the practice that everyone else gets. But that may be the only slight drawback they're going to have, but I can't see it being too much of a problem, to be honest. They're definitely not going to be up against 50 years of Mercedes engine experience, I don't think, because of course Honda make their own engines outside as well, so it's only been a few years that they've been out of the sport, so if anything, they're only going to be a few years behind everybody else, even in the current regulations.
It's surprising, or perhaps not surprising, depending on your experience and your understanding of it, but the fact that we are looking at V6 turbos now, not necessarily the V8 aspirated engines, that makes a big enough difference for a manufacturer like Honda to come back in. Like, it makes it more cost effective, which either shows how expensive it is to create a separate dedicated engine for something, or they just simply don't have V8 aspirated engines that they produce as standard. But I do wonder if they have to produce a V6 turbo engine for a Formula One car, what kind of similarities that they could take from any of their cars on the factory floor, if any.
Well, yeah, this is one thing that they announced as well. They said they were coming back in purely because of the fuel saving or the energy saving aspect of the engines, because they're new, more economical designs. they feel that they fit in a lot more with that in their road cars, and they can actually use something from that technology of the the efficiency side is what they're looking at more than anything else. So I don't think that they'll never use a Formula One car in any kind of road car, because it's tuned to the max. They're not that much different from road car engines, but they're just doing stupid revolutions per minute, like where a normal road car will do 3,000. The Formula One cars are doing 19,000 and things like that. And they're basically like bulletproof reinforced road engines with some tweaks made to them, but there's not a massive amount of difference. It's just the pure strain they go under to do that. So I think Honda have realised that now that it's not all out and out power, and there's a lot of economical bits and pieces coming in with the engines now, where they have to be very economical. There's power saving, there's all of this. That's what Honda have definitely pointed to in the press releases they've given out, that's one of the reasons why they're coming back, and where they feel they can offer something to the sport.
Yeah, so I also understand Toro Rosso are going to be using Renault engines from next year as well to follow their main team, Red Bull. So yeah, that's obviously they won't be using Ferrari engines anymore.
No, that's it. And another rumour this is at the moment as well was that Williams may be looking to swap to Mercedes as well, with Force India staying with Mercedes. So it might be, we get every year, don't we, get the driver shuffle around and that. So it may look, with all the new regulations coming, we might get a similar engine shuffle around the teams as well.
Well, it'd certainly be interesting to see, and I think, as you say, there's going to be more dedicated engine suppliers, and I think it's starting to take a little bit more shape now over 2014 as well. So I've got a feeling we should know by well into 2014 what the engine suppliers into the next big regulation change seasons will be.
Yeah, definitely. We'll look forward to any further announcements on those and confirmations of who everybody will be choosing as their engine suppliers. Right, the second story we're going to look at is the complaints we've had this week from various teams over the upcoming tyre changes from Pirelli. These teams include Ferrari, Lotus and Force India, all raising strong concerns about the changes.
Yeah, so this follows on from some of the debates we've had in previous podcasts, where we've said that obviously we've been awaiting some decision from Pirelli. I know we've said in the past that we've felt that they've had to do something about it. Looks like they are, and they've held their hands up and said that there are going to be changes. We don't know what those changes are yet, I think, but they know there's going to be changes up to Canada, isn't it?
It's hard to speculate, because again, we don't know what they're going to do. We can only assume, I think, that they're going to try and make tyres. What they're going to do is try and make tyres that last longer. And I think the problem they've got at the minute with their tyres is maybe that operating window that they're trying to, where the tyres switch on, if you like, and operate the best. Maybe that's too small and teams either can't heat them up enough or overheating them. Maybe that operating window needs to be bigger. But again, like has been said and raised in these things, they can't just go back to last year's tyres because they're too far away from the regulations. How much they haven't really got enough sort of room here, and then bringing that back to the teams as well. Like, they can't make a massive change from the team's point of view as well, because it may be that Ferrari, Lotus, Force India, by design, are better on their tyres, and you can't really change the goalpost mid-season. So I can understand their complaints. I don't know if you think maybe they're just kicking out because, oh yeah, we're in front, we're taking advantage of it, or I do think that they're fundamentally just moving the goalpost right in the middle of the season. Do you agree with that as well, or do you think they need to do something about the tyres so desperately that it has to be done right now?
I think they need to try and do something, but I don't think that I think anything they do other than small tweaks or small increases will be effectively moving the goalposts. And I think you are on a hiding to nothing. I think the big lesson learned for Pirelli is if you don't get this right, or you don't make allowances for the cars, wearing the tyres out as hard as they do, or the fact that the drivers will want to drive the blasted cars, as fast as they possibly can, then I think they've sort of caused this themselves, more or less. They've said, "Oh, we've been surprised," but you've had a lot of data from the previous season, and I think I do think you're on a hiding to nothing either way now. So it's a case about damage mitigation, both for the sport now and for the suppliers themselves. And I think, if they can't, I think they just need to make the existing tyres as durable as they possibly can in terms of, try and keep whatever they can.
Yeah, try and keep the compounds as similar to what they've got at the minute, without making, like I say, don't making any massive changes, just keeping it and tweaking it slightly. Even if it only ekes out maybe 3 or 4 more laps per stint, at least they get they're getting, and maybe even that, maybe a little incremental increase as well. If they can work out what's causing the tyres to go off so quickly, if they change it very subtly from race to race, because I think the compound, I don't know this for definite, but I think the compounds vary slightly from race to race anyway, and they've got a certain, but it's within a certain window for each set of tyres. So maybe they need to look more at the actual compounds and then, like I say, maybe bring something slightly tweaked and little incremental changes rather than these big sweeping changes that seem to be talked about at the moment.
And as a last resort, if they can't get that operating window to be longer, as you say, they just bring in harder tyres for the next few races. Well, that has its own ramifications, but I think they are on damage litigation now, and I think whatever they do, they just have to be very careful and just make sure they really nail it for next season. Okay, the last on the news roundup now is that breaking news is that we've had information that Mercedes have conducted a tyre testing session with Pirelli at the end of the Barcelona race a couple of weeks ago. And there have, as I say, there's been a few protests from some of the teams lodged as a result as to what this is all about.
Yeah, I think that's it. In the face of the sport, it's not only goes against the fair play of the sport, it also does go against the actual rules of the sport, because from what I can understand, Pirelli asked Mercedes to participate in a tyre test, I'm guessing to go with all the other tyre bits and pieces that we've seen going on and the improvement of the tyres that they want to make and the problems they've been having. And they've probably singled out Mercedes because they were having a lot of problems with their tyres.
Most acute, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what they wanted to nail down. But I think Mercedes are right to go to the test, but I think Mercedes have made a massive, massive error of judgment in using this year's car, because they fundamentally, although they are allowed to tyre test in the middle of the season, I think they've now contradicted the other rules of no in-season testing on this car. So what they really should have done is, I know, and again, Pirelli say that they blind test the tyres, so Mercedes can't actually get anything out of this. So if that's the case, I don't understand why Mercedes didn't bring last year's car to the tyre tests.
Yeah, I suppose the thing is, bearing in mind that when we first heard this, some of the Mercedes comments were like, we've had approval from the FIA, but judging by the investigation, it doesn't look like that's quite been literally the case. As you say, perhaps they have had approval, but not necessarily using this season's car, which I think is probably the predominant reason of why they're still being investigated. But what I don't understand is, perhaps naively, when I first heard of that, and when you just mentioned the fact that they code the tyres, what information Mercedes could eke out of that testing, even say if you had codes A to F or whatever on the tyres, what information do you think that they could successfully glean from that, which would give them an advantage? Because I suppose that's predominantly what the teams are arguing.
Well, the other teams' arguments are the fact that they've just had more running than they have on, regardless of what the tyres are, because right. I know the compounds are all going to be different. They're probably not going to have been testing standard compounds that they're going to bring to the race, but Mercedes must already hold enough data that they can kind of reverse engineer somewhere near what tyres they were running. So Mercedes obviously being allowed to collect the information from the test, I think, is where the problem is coming from the other teams, and where the protest is actually stemming from, is the fact that not that they've been outrightly given this information, but they may be able to take, even if it's a tiny advantage, because they can't work out the tyres, there's going to be some kind of, reverse engineering back to what they could have got out of the tyres. I think as well that Mercedes have really shot themselves in the foot, because what gains they would have made, even if they've made any, would be tiny, minimal gains. I think for the amount of damage this is going to do them, and the possible punishments that may follow if they are deemed to have broken the regulations, I don't think they've gained enough out of it to have put themselves in that position.
Do you think it could have been a daft error in terms of, they just weren't really thinking, or do they? I mean, it's like, I mean, are Mercedes able to, if Pirelli asked them to test, are Mercedes able to even bring them last year's car if it's given to them at short notice? Well,
this is a good question as well, because you can say, well, last year's car has no relevance to this year, but if you look back at last year's Mercedes car, it seems to have the same fundamental problems as this one does. It still seems to eat the tyres in the same way. It's not very good at certain tracks. The same last year. It seems to have a lot of similarities to last year's car, and the problem is, from Mercedes' point of view, I don't think it's their problem that they've got problems with the tyres, if you see what I mean. I think they're trying to help Pirelli out because it's beneficial to them, but the way it's all gone down as such, it's really blown it out of probably all proportion, and anything they've achieved has been blown away, and they could stand, say, if they are seen to have broken the rules, they could get some very, very harsh penalties from this.
Could they get any sporting penalties? Could Hamilton and Rosberg get impacted by this?
I'm not really sure, because of course the in-season testing rule, or ban of in-season testing, is a fairly new rule, and I don't believe we've ever seen anyone break that rule before, so it's kind of new ground for the sport, and what they choose to impose is probably how severely they see that it's been impeded.
And again, this is increasingly hard about, as you say, about what they've been able to glean in terms of additional performance knowledge or whatever. So, that they could really be hit hard for something which has given them barely any information. I mean, on top of the fact that these mysterious Pirelli changes will be coming into effect in Canada, sort of tells you about, if Mercedes make a drastic improvement now, would that be as a result of the tyre changes that have been made, or the information that they may or may not have been able to glean from this test?
Yes, and of course you're going to get people arguing as well that Pirelli have looked at Mercedes because they've had the worst problems, and maybe Mercedes have a different problems for everyone else. So perhaps they've solved in terms of changing the tyres and thinking they're solving the problem for everybody. They've only solved it for Mercedes because that's the only car they've looked at. Yep. Probably a fairer thing would have been to have offered every team the same testing.
Yeah, it's funny though, because Ross Brawn mentioned that Pirelli have asked for this before and the teams have declined. I don't know why, because they say, well, that's because it's against the rules. But even using old cars, perhaps. I suppose the problem I've got is that I don't quite understand just yet as to what the FIA think Mercedes have done wrong. Is it the fact that they've used the 2013 car? Is it the fact that they've tested at all? Is it the fact that Pirelli have even asked them? That's the question which I haven't quite got clarified. We're on the assumption that it's because they were using the 2013 car that's the main bone of contention here.
Yeah, it will be, because they're banned from in-season testing, which of course is only relevant to this year's car, so they're not allowed to test this year's car while the season is on, and that's the sporting regulation that they have to answer to now for braking.
It's very interesting, because Ross Brawn did also say though that Pirelli, he said this in an interview with Sky, that we've got Pirelli have basically gone to them and said, well, clearly us using old cars, as in 2010, 2011 models to test on these tyres, clearly isn't a great representation. Now, I can't say for definite whether Pirelli might have suggested they use the existing car, which would be very interesting. I mean, whose choice is that? Is it Mercedes?
Yeah,
is it
so
Pirelli?
This is what we don't know. It's at such an early stage, and the news is sort of only just breaking now that we don't really know what the case was. But I think the problem is that we're going to see as well, a lot of people are going to argue the fact that that's always the case with tyre testing. When they test tyres for next year, they generally test the years before's car, like they had the Lotus test car, and I think it was the 2012 test car was the 2010 Lotus. So they're always testing with old cars anyway. So I don't understand why they couldn't have used last year's car for this, because if they base all their testing for the next year on an old car, why they couldn't base the testing for the changes on there. The only thing I can think is that they did just single Mercedes out because Mercedes were having such bad problems with the tyres.
Indeed, I suppose this opens up another can of worms if to say that if they're using any kind of car for next year's tyres, they'll be even further off because there's such a difference in design, but that's a completely different debate entirely.
I say the issue we're going to run into now is a lot of people are going to argue the fact that, like you say, as I said earlier, if Mercedes have got a very, very specific problem that doesn't affect any of the others, and Pirelli used the data they've gained to fix that problem, it might not fix the tyre degradation problem across the entire field. It might only fix the problems that Mercedes are having, which will then obviously give them a massive unfair advantage over the rest of the field.
Yeah, we'll certainly see. I do believe it's in the next few days that we might see the investigation leading up to the Canadian Grand Prix. So we wait with bated breath to see what the complete facts are, if they fall out during that period, and whether we get a final decision.
Yeah, and no doubt we'll be probably covering that in the news for the Canadian Grand Prix podcast, I should guess. Right, and on to the prediction section. I'll start by asking Carl, who do you think is going to be on pole?
I think Nico Rosberg's going to make it a consecutive pole. I think the only reason being is because a couple of factors involved. Mercedes looking very, very good on the tight, slow cornering type tracks, and essentially that was in the last sector of the last race. It proved that it was a good sign for Monaco, and it's I think it's going to prove to be the case here. I think they're going to be, with the suspension technology they've got as well, it's going to make them easily the fastest over the relatively short lap of Monaco. And the reason why I'm not necessarily going for Lewis is because Rosberg's been able to be a more consistent qualifier at the moment, so I think he might just edge it.
Okay, and who have you got for the winner?
Right, well, whilst it's well renowned that obviously where you qualify typically is where you finish, I do feel that the tyres are still going to be too much of a problem for Mercedes, and I think eventually, whether it's safety cars or it's just a general pit stops, I think that Red Bull will be able to overtake them when Mercedes are in the pits. So I'm going to go for Red Bull achieving strategically the edge and just about being able to get ahead of Rosberg for the race. So I'm going to go for Vettel to win the race. Okay, now over to Tony for race predictions. So who do you think is going to stick it on pole?
I think Lewis Hamilton, but I think it's going to be very, very tight. It's going to come right down to the wire between the two Mercedes. They're both going to be right in there come the end of it, but I think Lewis may just about edge it because I think he likes the tighter street circuits.
And who do you think is going to win the race?
I'm going to go for Hamilton as well, just because I think it's going to be very, very difficult to overtake here. And having both cars on the front row, as I'm predicting is going to happen, is going to be a massive thing for Mercedes. And whichever one ends up in front, I think the other one's going to push the gap back to the field a little bit and give the car in front a little bit of breathing space. Of course, saving their own tyres as well in that, because they're both going to get to run in relatively clean air. And then I think Mercedes probably will bring it in 1-2 because of just how difficult overtaking is here. The only small thing I can see going wrong is if they can't keep up the pace and maybe Red Bull keep their tyres longer, who I think is going to be coming in behind them, that Red Bull may overtake them in the pits if they can go a couple of laps longer. But I'm gonna stick my neck on the line and say that Mercedes can keep it up, and I'm going to go with Hamilton to be the one that does it. So Jess, who do you think is going to be fastest on Saturday?
Lewis Hamilton.
And who do you think is going to win the race on Sunday?
Killing Raikkonen.
Okay, it's announced the qualifying roundup and Q1. So a damp Q1 starts with the Marussia of Bianchi stopping on track with an airbox fire, meaning he's unable to continue and set a qualifying time.
Yeah, that must have been quite a blow for Marussia and Bianchi in particular, because of course, as we've seen, he's been one of the stronger of the back running teams. So I'm very unlucky for them not to have been able to set any qualifying time at all.
Yeah, he has been very consistent, and it's always a shame when you feel you can even continue that consistency on, but you just obviously can't because of your car's on fire. So it does help. It doesn't help, does it?
And of course, Monaco is a driver's track as well. The car does obviously play a big part, as it does in any race, but I think the driver makes the difference in Monaco. So it would have been really nice to have seen what he could have done. And of course, as we'll see later on, Caterham got through to Q2. So I think had Bianchi set any times, he would have really fancied himself for doing the same, or maybe challenging that Caterham for that spot.
And also, we've got the issue with Ferrari, where they were unable to fix Massa's car, and he was unable to compete in Q1.
Yeah, that all started from quite a strange accident he had in the practice session. I don't know, what do you think really happened with him? He just seems as if he either outbroke himself, completely locked up and couldn't avoid going into the wall, or my personal opinion, I think he definitely had a car failure there.
Well, I don't think Ferrari have confirmed one way or another yet exactly what it was, whether they will do or not. But it
they on the day they went towards driver error, so I'm guessing that they're probably not planning on investigating it much further.
No, but what I don't understand then is that how the wheel can suddenly sort of like go in very, very quickly, which it did seem to. And I'm talking about the front left just before the accident happened, and it seemed like he just didn't have any steering there. Now, of course, I don't know what it's like, whether the car is chucked down, towards that angle because of the camber on the road. But it does seem a very bizarre accident because it's so sudden. He just seemed to have no steering. So I don't know if it could be suspension problems. I know Damon Hill and Johnny Herbert actually mentioned that it could be something like that. That's what it suggested. But it's just a shame that it meant that he was unable to compete at qualifying time.
Yeah, and of course we had then the Lotus team who didn't have the same misfortunes as Ferrari and were able to get Grosjean out into Q1, and he was able to set a time that got him into Q2 as well.
Yeah, that was a fantastic turnaround. and obviously I think it was recognised afterwards by Grosjean that they did very well to do that. It's getting quite often really again his accidents, which I know we'll pick up later, but very very good job by them, and it just proves that Lotus is quite competitive in these sort of tracks.
Okay, yeah, and talking of competitive, we had someone who we didn't expect to be setting the fastest time. We had Pastor Maldonado finishing on top of the pile in the end of Q1.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's of course it's probably something to do with the tyres, but whether that's also related to traffic and.
I think quite a big factor as well. Of course, don't forget this was all carried out on intermediate tyres the whole session as well. So rain obviously is a bit of an equaliser across the field.
Yeah, very much so, and I think it's one where if you just and it's also not just necessarily the rain, but also how that track quickly dries out at the right time. If you get it just at the right time, it can make all the difference between, as you say, the back of the grid and the front.
And as well, with the intermediates wearing out quicker as well, I don't think a lot of the big teams took the risk of sending their drivers out for extra laps as well. They were saving those in case they had a rainy race as well.
And also in terms of punching above their weight, certainly with Van der Garde in the Caterham making it through to Q2 for the first time, which is a fantastic effort. Probably down for similar reasons as well, but was nevertheless a very good result.
Yeah, I think of course you've got to think that only Massa went out as a guaranteed going out because he didn't take part in it, but losing Paul di Resta as well, that's two big names going out in there, so that gave him a little bit of a boost up. So it wasn't just the fact that it was because people like Massa didn't qualify, it was the fact that he actually did beat Paul di Resta as well.
He did, yeah, and it showed he let his Paul di Resta's feelings show, unfortunately, on the radio as well and afterwards. And whilst I accept that no doubt it's disappointing, I do have an issue with necessarily putting the full blame on the team in public, even though it was probably their fault. I think he's got to be careful really to not upset them too much, because at the end of the day, you are very much dependent on them preparing the car to the best of their ability for each race.
Yes, I think he was very, very harsh on the team with what he said afterwards. It was quite clearly a mistake because I believe he was the only driver that didn't come in for a fresh set of inters, but maybe they did think they had a bit more left in the tyres than they actually did. So maybe they were thinking more of the long game and thinking, well, if we have a rainy race as well as a qualifying session, we're going to have an extra set of inters there. But of course, the set he was on just didn't allow him to put in the times that he needed to get past the cars around him.
I just think it's something you have privately with your team, and you show that even in the public eye, you say, well, we say something along as if we win as a team, or we succeed as a team, we fail as a team, and the team are going to look at ways of improving in the future, and we'll learn from our lessons and just leave it at that.
I think he was a bit harsh. I think he called it a stupid mistake from somebody in the team, I think was kind of his words. So I think that was a bit harsh. And maybe just take the whole, it was a team error. It wasn't the right thing to do. We'll learn from it and move on. Take that attitude possibly would have been better. Yeah.
So in terms of the cars that were eliminated from Q1, from the following down, so we got 17th Paul di Resta. In 18th place we had Charles Peake. 19th we had Esteban Gutierrez. In 20th we had Max Chilton. 21st we have Jules Bianchi. And of course in 22nd we have Felipe Massa. Obviously the last two were not able to set any qualifying times.
And I believe as well from that as well, the only thing it changed, will change over from the race as well, is that Max Chilton has a gearbox penalty as well, so he'll be starting from the back as getting the 5th place gearbox drop.
Oh, yeah.
Right then, so on into Q2, we had another damp start to the session with all teams choosing to come out back on inters.
It did, but we found that the track continued to dry. I think this is where we started to find the teams going, hang on, we might need to at least have some dry tyres into Q3. So it was always a tricky judgment to know whether you stick the dryers on in Q2.
Yeah, so I think it was always it was on that kind of knife edge when it was anyone that was. If you stuck the dry tyres on probably any time in Q2, you may have just about got away with it, but you was either going to do an absolutely flying lap compared to everybody else on the inters, or you were going to crash into the wall. So again, the stakes are heightened at Monaco, aren't they? It's not a track where you can really come off and get off lightly with it. So
yeah, it's always pretty difficult, and it's so important to have the right tyres now on edge as we can see. And that's one thing which I will say just very briefly that Pirelli I think should keep in terms of their tyres, that when it gets wet and dry, I do feel feel quite strongly that they should have that difference in the tyres. So if there's any changes they need to make going forward, I hope that there's not too much of a change to the difference between intermediates and dries and the difference between them as the track dries out. I hope it's mainly down to the fact the track is drying out and not necessarily how the tyre responds to the road.
Yeah, I think they need to. I don't think they can ever get to a point where there's a small sort of window in between dry and wet where no tyre works. I think there needs to be some kind of overlap. I think so. The Inters need to be able to need to still be runnable tyres on a drying track, if you like. Yeah. Which is quite good in a way, because they do work, but they just wear out a hell of a lot quicker. So you may only get one lap in. So it does suit that. And like I say, hopefully they won't mess that balance up that they've got when they do change the tyres around.
So effectively, Vettel sets the fastest time of the session. Alonso qualifies very, very tight with the final lap.
Yeah, it was. I think he had about 2 seconds to go in the session. I think when he set his lap, obviously he would have got another one, but he wouldn't have been fueled. He wouldn't have had the tyres, etc. So yeah, it was his very last lap in the dying seconds of the session where he just about managed to scrape in, because I believe he was in about 14th or 15th place at that point. So
yeah, very tight.
Okay, so the cars we got going out then in Q2 was in 11th place we had Nico Hülkenberg, in 12th place Daniel Ricciardo, and 13th Roman Grosjean. After getting his car back on, he just couldn't put it together then for the to put himself a lap in that got there. And I think as well for Q1 when he came across, I think he probably done very, very quick times because he had very new tyres compared to everyone else. So obviously the luck didn't go across into Q2 and he was unable to get any higher than 13th. So we got, and then in 14th we got Bottas, 15th Van der Garde, which was also very good for him, because of course when they get into Q2 you just expect them to qualify bottom of the pack there, but he actually did set a faster time than the 16th place man Pastor Maldonado as well.
Okay, so now into Q3, and Q3 is the first session of the day to start in the dry with light rain towards the end of the session, but not enough for the teams to have to switch back to intermediates. So effectively the final top 10 on the grid was Nico Rosberg, second Lewis Hamilton, third Sebastian Vettel, fourth Mark Webber, fifth Kimi Raikkonen, sixth Fernando Alonso, seventh Sergio Perez, eighth Adrian Sutil, ninth Jenson Button, and 10th Jean-Eric Vergne.
Right, and into the race, which started with a relatively slow start from the Mercedes. They're both maintaining the lead, but going quite slow, I think. And we had some comments from Vettel as well towards the end saying he was surprised how slow they were going. Do you think they really were sandbagging just to look after their tyres, or do you think that it was always going to be their tactics to slow up everybody else as much as possible?
I would think it's very much the former, really, in terms of I think they were trying to save their tyres, but as a result, the benefit is that they effectively do back up the rest of the grid. So I mean, Sebastian, so derogatory, but said there were two buses going along. But I suppose that sort of proved it, really, in terms of that they were. I think the idea was obviously they needed to try and maintain the gap, so both cars could then come out back into first and second place once the pit stops or first round of pit stops had happened. But it made a little bit of a mockery of it. But then, is that any different to any other team in previous seasons?
I was going to say the only reason I did ask was I was quite expecting really to see Lewis Hamilton back in the pack up to let Rosberg go, basically to give him that breathing space in the pit stops to make sure nobody was going to get out in front of him. But I was surprised to see that Rosberg didn't pull away from Hamilton. That surprised me slightly. So I wondered whether maybe they didn't have the true pace there. Like I say, they were just holding back to save the tyres completely, and it wasn't a controlling tactic that they were pulling everybody back that much.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's. I think the thing was that everyone then just thought to themselves, well, okay, this is getting a bit processional now, and it just proves how hard it can be to overtake in Monaco if everyone. It's almost like a game of poker, really, that whoever's first to blink on the front row of the grid, because later on in the race, which we'll probably go on to a bit later, but we saw other cars quite easily overtaking on much fresher tyres, but of course the front teams all didn't really want to outwear their tyres, just in case that they wouldn't be able to overtake in the pits. So pretty much, I think roughly, I'd say the top six perhaps were all on because of waiting for each other to see about when they'd pit and how fast their tyres would wear away. So Yeah,
Yeah,
for
'cause it's
that,
what-
for that. It was a
Because
great
yeah,
statement.
this is what we both said we expected to do, didn't we? That Red Bull would maybe go a bit longer or try and save their tyres a bit and use the extra clean laps that they got to try and then jump Mercedes in the pits.
Yeah, very much so. But I think going into the the next phase of the race when when Hamilton sort of came in, and unfortunately it was a bit hard to sort of I think judge the 6 second gap, and I think, to be honest, in my opinion, he left leaving the gap too late, which meant Vettel and Webber were able to sort of scamper around the track much quicker to effectively negate the gap that they wanted to try and leave. So he's owned up to the mistake, and we move on. But I think that's what ultimately it's such fine lines when it gets to those sort of timings, especially in a short lap like Monaco. It's easy to make a mistake.
But yeah, we'll have a look at that again in a minute in more depth as well, because going back to Hamilton's start, he did have a good start, and the reason he was in this position and having to, like say, judge a gap and try and work out what it was, because he had a very, very good getaway, didn't he? He was alongside Rosberg in the first corner, and I think had he made it stick there, it might have been roles reversed and it might have been a little bit different. But like say, the fact that he couldn't get past him there in that first corner, then actually did lead later on. He was stuck behind, so Rosberg was always in control of that race, and like say, that then led to Hamilton's, by his own admission, his mistake that he left too much of a gap that did cost him to be jumped by both Red Bulls in the pits. But sorry, just going to say as well, just from the start as well, it was quite a surprising clean getaway from everybody really as well. But say Hamilton had a very, very quick start, but we had no incident whatsoever in the run down to the first corner or through it as well. So.
We didn't, with typically the good starting cars. So the good starting cars I'm thinking of are definitely Ferrari, to a certain extent Red Bull as well. But
one of the Red Bulls at least.
Yeah, indeed. But we saw that actually how well negated the fact that there's such a quick corner, or the distance between
the run down to the corners.
The
short,
run down
the start line.
Yeah, it's very, very short. So it doesn't actually matter how good you start. It's all into the qualifying really at the race. So so short run into the first corner, and that sort of led the procession for the race for at least well up to the first pit stops, when Hamilton made the mistake. In terms of leaving enough gap quick enough for Mercedes to come back out 1-2.
Yeah, this was one thing I was wondering in Mercedes as well. Do you think they actually missed a trick by making Hamilton judge the gap on track rather than just stacking them in the pits and bringing them out closer together, obviously, because you can see where you are when you're just sat behind the car in the pits?
Yeah, well, I think the thing about it I think it's quite hard to sort of perhaps do that and ensure that the pack is backed up sufficiently. It's an interesting point, and I think it would have been nice to have perhaps seen that as well, almost like for another team, similar situation, to see if it would have come off. But I guess we'll never know. But I think, I suppose the question is, if you do it like that, how do you control and make sure that the cars behind, who are probably almost guaranteed to be on much fresher tyres than you, because obviously your teams have got a higher tyre wear chance, that they're not just going to scamper through and get enough time in the bank, as it were, for when they then come round and do their pits and still are able to come out ahead. So I suppose that's the only challenge I'd say to that one.
Well, yeah, that's probably going to be the big thing. Like say that Hamilton still had to back the rest of the pack up effectively. He wasn't just allowed to take a free pit stop. And again, as we said earlier on, this was what put him being in second was what put him in that position. He was effectively, I think, probably then just taking one for the team, weren't he, and holding the pack up, making sure they weren't going to sail past Rosberg. So they were, I suppose Mercedes were playing it clever, and rather than thinking, do we take a chance at a risky 1-2? Do we get a safe win? And then Hamilton finishes where he finishes, and that's his lookout, because this is a team game. We want a win out of the car this season, and this is our chance of getting it. So where Hamilton finishes is probably irrelevant in that. We'll have him back in the pack up and make sure that we get that win. And I'd say probably a smaller factor as well is the very, very tight pit lane at Monaco as well. So maybe it's logistically bad to try and actually stack cars in the pit lane as well, because we may have seen other cars go in for that had that been the case, but like I say, we didn't see any, so maybe it is a slight logistical thing from the pit lane size as well. But yeah, so that leads on quite nicely as well to a question we had from one of our regular listeners who's been listening since we started the podcast at the beginning of the season, and that is Leon from the forums. He's sent a question in asking, as the safety car was out when Rosberg come in for his pit stop, would it not have been more effective for him to have waited at the end of the pit lane for Hamilton to have finished his pit stop, then them coming back out 1-2, and the safety car would have then picked Rosberg up as the leader?
Very good question, and I'll be honest. I don't honestly know. I'm not too au fait with the precise rules of how the safety car ends up. It certainly sounds like one which, on second thoughts, is a very good point. I mean, obviously, just my understanding. Obviously, the safety car at least has to pick up the lead car. And if I understand his point correctly, if Rosberg would have waited for Hamilton, the safety car is effectively waiting for the both of them rather than just for the lead car. And again, I suppose, well, they have strategists paid at Mercedes as well for this very thing. But I guess I'd just go back to my original point about perhaps they were focusing too much on slowing the pack up, which meant that if they wait, Rosberg is effectively waiting for Hamilton, and there's perhaps a risk then that they both would not be able to have got out in time, and then would have been, say, second and third with Vettel out in front.
Concentration on that lead car, making sure that come out in the lead at all costs.
I think they prioritised the lead car, basically. There's a long way around of me saying that, basically. So, yeah, I think that's the only reason why perhaps they didn't consider it, but it's certainly an interesting thought. I'd like to see a team try it, actually.
Yeah, or maybe some actual seeing the rules, because I'm guessing, I can't think of an example in the past, but the only thing that I can think of is the reason why they would have not even looked at trying this is possibly, obviously, under the safety car conditions, there's no overtaking. You do not overtake any cars under the safety car. You trail around wherever you're going. And even if you're back markers, you stay where you are. There's no overtaking. You pick up the lead car is picked up by the safety car. You trundle on around. But I think if you're in the pits, that is the only time when the cars in the race still are permitted to go past you. So the only thing I can think of that would stop this, and as I can't think of any examples to prove or disprove this off the top of my head, but I believe what it would be is if Vettel had not overtaken anybody, but gone past Rosberg while he was in the pits, I believe he would have then inherited the lead and become the lead driver, and then the safety car would have only had to have actually picked him up, as opposed to waiting for Rosberg to pick him up. So that's the only other thing that I can think of, like say tactics. The reasons why Mercedes didn't do it, tactics. They wanted Rosberg out first, obviously, and they wanted him out as quickly as possible. So that's possibly why Mercedes didn't do it. But I believe the reason that they couldn't afford to do it is I think if the cars on the track pass the cars in the pits, there's nothing to stop that kind of overtaking under the safety car. I'm pretty sure that is in the rules that you're only not allowed to overtake on the track. If you go past the pits, you lose the lead. You don't automatically keep it because there's no overtaking. So that's I think how that one panned out and why they had to get him out as quickly as they could, because they couldn't risk that happening. But again, very, very nice to have a question come in. We've had bits and pieces of feedback come in from sort of time to time. We had little bits and pieces that we've tried to include in the show, change it around a little bit as people have suggested, but we don't seem to get many direct questions that are featured on the podcast. So I would just put anyone that does listen out there and does want to get involved, we really, really do like that, don't we? The feedback coming in from the people that are listening is really what keeps us going, what we want to do, and is the reason we set the podcast up in the first place. Is we want to build this community around people that like Formula One, and I think to do that we need a lot of questions coming in, and we really enjoy answering them on the podcast as well.
Yeah, it's our reason d'etre, or our reason for existing, as you say, and I think that's where we feel we want to be a little bit more different from other podcasts. Ones where it's directly affected by the listeners, and that you drive the debate quite literally. Pardon the terrible pun, but it's the truth.
Yeah, we're getting the wheels turning, I think, this season, because we pick all of the news stories and everything like that. But like I say, if we can get enough momentum going, that's what we really want to be aiming for. We want everything, more or less everything, picked by the listener, and then that's they'll choose the show, and we'll basically do the show from there. So that's what we want to try and get towards. So
very much so.
Okay, and then we'll move on to another quite a large feature of the race, I think, as well, was the passes by Perez as well. We saw a couple of good ones, I think, but maybe towards the end, and especially the one on Kimi, I think he pushed his luck just a little too far there.
Yeah, I think he did. Simple as. I think the passes on Alonso and Button were exceptional. Very brave. Very, if it was as a result of watching the GP2 races, which some commentators have suggested, then that's basically good research. Yes, you could say it's potentially taking advantage of the other drivers who are more thinking about championship or constructors' points and are taking their time on the tyres. But that doesn't excuse the door still being open in terms of the amount of space Perez had to overtake.
Yeah. Yeah, like so, if the move wasn't on, his car wouldn't have been there in the first place, would it?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it was definitely a move too far. It just proves perhaps a level of inexperience. But I always think about it very similar as if you're on a driving test. If you're going down a very narrow road and another car's coming towards you, you just got to look if the gap's there. If the gap isn't there, you don't take it. Yeah. And it very much was Perez was still of the opinion he had the gap, even though. You could see with previous corners with Raikkonen, the corners were ever shrinking, and it's just a judgment thing, and it wasn't there, and that's pretty much it to say. It was enough to take them both out of the race, and I just think he was doing so well. If he'd have just stayed behind Raikkonen for the rest of the race, he still would have been so much better regarded as a result. But now he's paid the ultimate price and taken himself completely out of the race. So hopefully that's the shock to the system he'll need to be a little bit more steady in terms of his judgment. But I hope it doesn't discourage him either, because that makes it for exceptional racing. We had Kobayashi similar, which as I caused his fair share of crashes as well. But if you can just try and curb it a little bit, it will make for some fantastic racing, and certainly will make him very highly regarded.
Yes, I think as well, possibly as well, it was maybe a little bit overconfidence and a bit of the heat of the moment on Kimi as well. I think he had built his confidence up through the race by pulling off those moves on Alonso and Button, and maybe he kind of then thought, or he's a little bit indestructible, he can just do that to every car that he meets on there as well. And as the commentators both said as well, there's when you're committing to that corner there, it's one of the few places you can get away with overtaking on the track, but you've got to commit to it very, very early. So by the time he'd already put his car in there, even though the gap was closing, there was no way for him to get out. They were always going to go through their two cars at the same time. So it's, like I say, he's committed too early, and I think he's actually committed to a move that was that sort of outlandish again because he got away with it twice. So I think he got overconfident, he rode his luck, and it just ran out at that point. So.
So don't be discouraged, Perez. But next time, just make sure there's a
think about it for a little bit longer before you do it.
Yeah, or pace yourself.
Yeah, that's it. And I think as well, definitely, I think the drivers see it this way, and I think even a lot of people at home, we're all falling into the trap a little bit of thinking, because we hear it so much, there's no overtaking at Monaco. You can't overtake at Monaco, and as soon as anybody actually does overtake there, eyebrows automatically raise. It's like you can't overtake at Monaco. What are they doing overtaking at Monaco? There must have been something wrong with that pass. There must have been. It must have been done outside of the rules. They must have broken some kind of rule because you just can't pass at that track. But I think it's a mindset that the drivers have got to break, because there are still some there. And although qualifying's a lot and we can see they can control the race from there, you can still be passed on the track. So and even more so on that, I think Button's now starting to lean a little bit heavy, and Alonso is probably a little bit guilty of this as well. As soon as they both got past, they were on the radio calling out Perez as well, saying that they want the stewards to look at him. And I think the drivers have got to get out of that mentality as well, of trying to, if there's something doesn't go their way, they can't be straight on the radio saying, get Charlie to have a look at him, get like Charlie Whiting, the race director, get him to have a look at these people. What they need to be doing is getting right on the back of that car and then trying to overtake it again, and then the team will sort out whether it's illegal or not. The drivers need to get out of that mindset. They just need to think about racing, and they need the team to deal with all that. And that's something I'd like to. I don't like hearing all the radio messages of them complaining about other drivers overtaking them. If they're asked their opinion and asked what's happened while they're in the car from the team, fair enough. But they don't need to bring it to their attention. There's millions of people watching this. There's enough people that are going to notice if something's gone a bit astray. So it doesn't need pointing out every 5 minutes from the drivers either.
Absolutely, and I think Raikkonen did exceptionally well to sort of come back and ultimately finish in 10th.
Yes, I think that was a little bit. I think a lot of people would say it's a little bit of poetic justice there. The fact that Raikkonen seemed very, very hurt by the collision with Perez, and obviously had to go back to the pits and picked up a fresh set of tyres, which, as we saw, did help him out in the end and helped him storm back right through up into 10th place. And we thought Perez had got away with it, but say the poetic justice came out in it, and Perez ended up actually retiring. So a lot of people would think that was the way it should have been, and would be glad for Kimi as well, because of course that keeps his record of finishing in the points for consecutive races intact as well, because he picked up the last points winning place, of course.
Also proves you can overtake in Monaco when you have, especially with the tyres the way they are at the moment, even more so because the difference is so great and the amount of grip is so great if you're on fresh tyres.
Yes, yeah, because he dropped to the back of the field, didn't he? And there was still 15 cars in the race at this point as well. So,
and it also shows that actually, really, what was quite processional first half of the race was down to the top, I don't know, 6 cars roughly. Waiting for each other to effectively blink, and of course, whilst everyone's doing that, they're running around on ever wearing tyres, and they're always going to be slower than they normally would. And so you say you got someone like Perez who isn't necessarily got the thoughts of the championship and the season, but he's just trying to get as high as he possibly can every race in a relatively uncompetitive car, diving through. So and say eventually that's what happened to Raikkonen as well. He just had to dive through the pack and showed you really can do it when you need to, and when you've got the tyres to suit.
Yeah, that's it. And along with Raikkonen actually coming back and getting in the points and talking of his consistently scoring points, we had a very consistent showing from Force India as well.
Yeah, very, very good. I think they'll like the fact that they're still up there with McLaren at the moment, and yeah, I mean with the top 4 teams, if I'm to call them that, in my opinion, which is Ferrari, Red Bull, Lotus and Mercedes, then the following 9th, 10th place theoretically is up for grabs with McLaren's problems. And you factor in the crashes that happen, such as Grosjean, which we'll go into in a minute. You're thinking, well, yeah, the sort of 5th, 6th place areas are very much in the reach quite consistently for the team. So the more they can do that, the better.
We had Paul di Resta's tyre disaster as well, didn't we, in qualifying? That actually saw him go out in Q1 as well. So to come back and finish 9th as well was a pretty good and consistent showing for him. And of course, Adrian Sutil actually managed to bring it home in 6th as well. So they've done, like I say, they've had their problems with the cars. They've had their share of bad luck already this season, but 2 very, very consistent drivers that seem to be definitely keeping out of trouble and bringing home the points wherever they've been possible.
Yeah, and so as Paul di Resta said, it further backs up the fact that you can overtake in Monaco as well. So
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, talking of other incidents and Grosjean in particular. Well, actually, we're going to Grosjean in a minute, but we had Max Chilton taking out Pastor Maldonado as well, and later apologising for it. So, would you think a rookie mistake, car being slow, or just a little bit of everything combined, really?
I'm going to go with a little bit of everything combined. Obviously, I think it's it's a shame. As I say, I'd probably discuss that in future podcasts, but I'd like to assess whether and how often a lot of these drivers receive formal coaching or improvement and development, and because I personally feel it's like any top end sport. No one ever bats an eyelid to think, saying like football or rugby or any other top sport, or the majority of the top sports, where you still have dedicated coaches to continue to maintain and improve your game. Whereas F1, it seems to be frowned upon. But I really do think if one of the rookies came out and either openly admitted or formed a coaching team for himself to continue to improve, I'd love to see if that has a positive impact to their progress and their performance, because I do feel they kind of need something. They are struggling in today's environment with Formula One, whereas I was used to, when I was a kid, seeing rookies come in and being just like, or if not better than the old guard that was in the races. So it's quite a big difference.
I think quite an easy trap to fall into as well with that as well is that a lot of people, I think, will question saying, if they're not ready for it and they're not at the top of their game, they shouldn't be in Formula One in the first place. But say
they're really, aren't they? That's the thing.
But there's always room for fine tuning. There's always room to get a little bit better. It's like if you look at any 18-year-old driver coming onto the grid, if they make it at that younger age, there's not been many, but there's been very young world champions and stuff like that. There's still a lot to learn, because even if you look back as when Alonso come through, he was a very, very young double world champion. Yeah. Of course, Vettel, very, very young double world champion. But they're still learning now, I think. I don't think they're at the top of their games. There's still more they can do. We've seen mistakes from Vettel. We've seen him do silly things that even he's probably thought after the race, no, I shouldn't have really done that. But like I say, maybe a few more of those lessons could be learnt by an older, more experienced head telling them it, rather than them they having to experience it on the track, possibly.
Well, just an analysis of their own driving, but perhaps this goes on. We simply don't know, and I do wonder why there does seem, if it does go on, why it doesn't seem to be more open and honest, because there seems to be a stigma attached to it. But I'm thinking about coaching teams here for yourself, that you analyse the videos, you work through what you can do better next time, etc. All the sort of things which I'd normally expect, sports people and athletes to do as a matter of just part of their work.
That's it. But like I say, yeah, obviously there's going to be a lot of that goes into the team debriefs at the end. But like I say, how much really one-to-one working is there?
Yeah.
Are the team briefs, this is where we failed or succeeded as a team? Or do they, like I say, have the drivers? Because, I think we've seen this before. We've had a couple of ex-Formula One drivers who have been coaches for the younger drivers, but you don't really see, they don't all seem to be doing it, and you don't really see, it's not a trend, is it? You see the odd one doing it, but unless it's all done behind closed doors and we can't see it.
Yeah, and it almost seem like if they do it, they want to go, it's because he's training him and that's it, Yeah. But, who would actually care? That's a matter of opinion, and you're still world champion. And that's what should really matter. And, yeah, it does seem to be genuine stigma attached to it, which I feel is a shame, because this is one of the biggest team sports in the world, I think, personally. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously you see the drivers with their personal trainers, they walk around the grid like say you should.
Yeah, personal trainer. Physically, it's not a problem, is it?
Yeah,
everyone seems to be okay with the physical side. Oh yeah, you've got to have a physical trainer to keep you at your best, etc. Well, why not have a mental one
coach,
and a technical coach and a it seems bizarre to me, but who knows?
But yeah, and talking of crashes as well, got the elephant in the room of crashes as well. I think of Roman Grosjean. I don't like to say it, but just quite clearly taking out Daniel Ricciardo as well. Not really a 50-50 in any way. Literally just crashed into him, didn't he? So
crashed in practice. Team did a fantastic job turning the car around for quali, but then did the same again in the race, and it just seems very easily distracted. And Eric Boullier suggested to me to be quite defensive, in my opinion, when.
So when you say just suggested to you, I thought you just had a quiet personal word with you saying,
yeah, I doubt it, but but it's when I think it was Ted Kravitz in an interview with Sky, at the end he seemed very, very miffed really, and slightly defensive on it really, because
I think the thing was he's had to do the exact same defence in the previous race, hasn't he? And he then said for the previous race that he had to give him a pretty stern telling off and saying basically wake up, get yourself together, and then to have this then dropped on him, that not only a couple of races down the road, but the race directly after saying that, you've got to worry a little bit then, haven't you?
But to be fair to him, he did also clearly state that his first concern, as it were, or what he was alluding to, was that he was a team principal first.
Yeah.
So that would suggest that he's still going to do exactly what you've just said. But how many more times does it have to happen? That's the question, because I understand other rumours that were abound as part of the commentary throughout the weekend was that Grosjean's contract is very... it's rolling basically, and on a periodical check. So who knows?
It's not secure for the rest of the season.
I'm not convinced. We might see him at the end of the season. I mean, there's typically, is it the halfway point in the season where you see some drivers switching and being taken on for the rest of the season? So who knows?
Yeah, I think that's it. And again, as we were just sort of alluding to there, obviously Boullier is Grosjean's manager, but as we say, I think he's going to always put his own self-preservation above anything he's going to do for Grosjean. So maybe the fact that he's Grosjean's manager means, like, as in personal manager as well as in team principal as well, that maybe Grosjean's got maybe a chance or two more than he possibly would have done had he not been managed directly by Eric Boullier. But it can't go on forever. Boulier's at some point he's going to say, no, my role as team principal here is more important. You're going to have to go. And I think that this could be on a knife edge. Like I say, by looking at the contracts and the way it stands at the minute, I'm completely with you on the fact that I'm not totally sure we'll see him at the end of the season if he carries on this way. And
Lotus are struggling financially in terms of making it, standing on its own 2 feet, making a profit. We know it made quite a substantial loss, and I would have thought that financial backers would want to be seeing, and sponsors would want to be seeing drivers not crashing and smashing up those cars with the sponsorship all over them, because they've had a drop in sponsorship, and I don't know to what extent that has been a result of the problems from last year. Nearly taking Alonso's hand off as part of the crash. It does have it does have a massive impact though on sponsorship for the teams.
And of course, it's kind of like it's always in the background. We never quite sort of really get to know the true impact of it. But replacing nose cones, cars, the pieces, all the carbon fibre bits and pieces that are smashed when the cars crash, they're not going to be cheap to replace. So if you have one or two of those a season, it's probably just all in within the cost. So if you're doing that race in, race out, and in practice, sometimes in qualifying, in the race, you're doing it constantly throughout a weekend, even your repair bill for your car is going to probably actually stand the team in a massive deficit when it comes to the money at the end of the race weekends. So yeah, we'll put no doubt unless he gets his act together and sorts himself out for the next race, we'll probably be talking about him again, I should imagine. So
no doubt. And with the rumours of Raikkonen moving to Red Bull, I wouldn't be surprised if we're trying to guess in future podcasts around who's going to fill the seats in for the rest of the season and next season.
Yeah, definitely. So there'll be a lot to talk about if Raikkonen does actually agree to go over to Red Bull, because that'll make for a very interesting partnership there. So yep, and of the back teams, we have the Mauritius and Caterham both coming in at 14 and 15, which is obviously still at the back with the amount of cars that finished, but obviously very, very good positions for them. And I think we have to look and give them quite a bit of credit for actually getting the cars over the line and finishing the full race, whereas a lot of the other, obviously every car that was behind them and retired didn't. So.
Well, I think that's the key point here is that yes, okay, they may have got the positions, due to accidents and crashes, etc. But that should also still be credit to them and the drivers, because
it's all part of racing, to avoid the incident.
Well, to avoid the incident and not have one yourself. And I'm thinking, Bianchi, Van der Garde, and Peak as well. Not necessarily Chilton because it's faux pas earlier, but that it is a big sign that they able to bring the cars home, and that's a very good sign for them, and they just need to continue with that, because the points should come if they're able to sort of match that with some steady improvement. So yeah, it's good. So it's good result for them, and as I say, hopefully, I've always liked to see that pack being brought close together, and I would be surprised actually to see if the pack has closed up over the last couple of races. Is there evidence to show that they are genuinely either maintaining their position or catching up, albeit to a small extent, to the rest of the teams? Because I'd be certainly worried if I was in Williams, for example, or a Sauber, because they're certainly snapping on the heels at the moment.
Yeah, it would be, like I say, it would be nice to see them actually make the deficit a little bit. I think particularly Bianchi, as we've discussed in previous podcasts as well, he's really closing that gap. He's down to sort of half a second now in pure pace as well. It's not because it's raining, it's not because of this, it's not because of that. There's no external factors. It's just when the two cars are going out and out for speed, he's only been half a second off the cars in front of him at some point. So yeah, the gap's definitely closing. They've definitely got a very good driver in Bianchi, and like I say, I wouldn't be surprised maybe a couple of races down the line that he might be actually on pure pace and merit alone actually pipping some of those cars in front of him to the places, and actually maybe getting out of Q1 on his own merit as well.
Well, if he does, you've got to be wondering how long he's going to stay at Marussia then as a result.
I think the arrangement there is only ever to get him experience before he goes to one of the bigger teams. I think he's destined for a big team very, very soon. I think within a couple of years at the most. So yeah, and then back at the other end of the grid, we had the Mercedes obviously coming home with Rosberg winning the race fairly convincingly in the end. Do you think that's a sign of they've sorted out their tyre issues and they're going to be a force for the rest of the season, or just a one-off?
Well, from Rosberg's perspective, I thought it was very convincing. He's shown I think he's not necessarily consistently better than Lewis, because I think they're almost even in terms of qualifying, or at least very close. But he's certainly a match for him, certainly a competition for him, and has been so consistent in that car.
I think I think that's where Lewis struggles a little bit as well. I think when Rosberg brings it every weekend, it might not be exceptional, but he brings the very best he can every weekend. Whereas you've got Hamilton, who's a bit up and down. His mind doesn't seem as focused as some of the others. And when he's on his game, no one can beat him. But he's not always on his game, and Rosberg always seems to be on his game without fail.
Yeah, I think there's an emotional, personal part there for Lewis, because he loves to do well so much, and he just that's the thing. But yeah, it does. You could argue that does sometimes affect the performance, whereas Rosberg is just frighteningly, and I do mean frighteningly, consistent all the time. And that is such a that's a trait which is emphasised in the performance, because when you've got a lot of variability elsewhere, you're going to mitigate that by your own consistency, and that's what he's doing in truckloads at the moment by just banging the times out, doing what's needed to be done. And let's not forget, it's Monaco in a car which struggles on its tyres, that isn't necessarily the most competitive. He was able to keep the lead.
Yeah, and that as well from earlier races as well, where he finished outside the points, didn't pick up points. It was because of car failures. He's not made any mistakes this season. He's had cars fail on him. So
errors. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I can't remember the last time I think any error was necessarily pinned on him. It just doesn't seem to happen. Immensely consistent, and I think that's his biggest strength. So he fully deserved the win. People could argue, well, that's because he qualified. Well, that's the nature of the track. Mercedes are likely, seemingly at the moment, from what we can see, this is likely to be their only win of the season, the way things are going, unless the tyre situation resolves, in somewhere in their favour in terms of changes, etc. So, I think they fully deserve it. I think a team deserves to win a race if they can qualify consistently and competitively, all the way through, just on merit. But whether this is a sign of things to come, I don't think it is, unless something significantly changes with the tyres in terms of updates or changes, which I don't think it will, because of the regulations and what they can and can't change. I think Pirelli can only mitigate them now. I think we're stuck with predominantly what we've got till the end of the season, more or less.
Yeah, like I say, we've got damage limitation. I think
it is damage limitation very much, and that's what Mercedes need to focus on and just get the next season. I do wonder why. I've said before in previous podcasts that if it's as a result of the different suspension technology they're using. It could be that. I'm surprised no one's actually mentioned it, perhaps because they know it's not the case, but I'm surprised that wouldn't necessarily be a factor. But I think other than that, I don't feel it's a particular sign of things to come. I think the next two races will certainly confirm or rebut that view, but I'm pretty confident that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I have to say I think I completely agree with you on that one as well, because obviously Monaco is a bit of a anomaly, as the I can say it. Yep, anomaly. As
yeah.
As far as tyres go, they always bring the absolute softest compounds they can bring. They always just want a lot of grip. It's quite a low speed circuit. There's not a lot of the tyres aren't completely destroyed. They don't need super hard compounds for like racing in the middle of the desert or anything like that. So it's always hard to gauge the tyre wear on there. And like I say, they did look a little bit sketchy on the tyre wear here as well. So maybe that's a bad sign for them as well. But of course, we've got the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, where we've got a track where tyres are very, very play a massive factor in how the race is going with Canada as well. And it's been said that, well, we're hearing bits and pieces all the time that there's going to be tyre changes for Canada. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know if it's going to be, so we'll have to wait and see there. But definitely, just the nature of Canada means the tyres are going to be very, very heavily tested. And of course, this was kind of what sparked Pirelli to bring the types of tyres they've been bringing for the past couple of years, where Bernie went to them and said, we want tyres like Canada in X year, where there was pit stops here, pit stops there, like 4-stop races, all the tyres were everywhere. But of course, that was just the way that particular race played out, and now they're trying to make it like that, race in, race out. But my point anyway is the fact that the tyres do play a very, very big role in Canada, so that's going to be, for me, will be the clincher of whether Mercedes have sorted themselves out or not as far as tyres go. But I have to say, I don't think they are, and I think we're going to see them qualify well in Canada and then drop off the pace. But I've got a horrible sort of sinking feeling as well. They're going to drop massively off the pace, and both of them are going to be quite a long way back by the time all the places shake out near the end.
Do you think they'll actually announce what the tyre changes are within reason publicly, or do you just think they'll say, yeah, we've changed them? Go and see what they're like.
Yeah, I think all it will be is they'll bring the same tyres as they would have bought previously. They were going to bring to the race anyway, but they'll just be made up of different compounds. So they'll just say we've tweaked the compound. That's the most I can see them saying they've done. So yeah, we've got consistency as the order of the day from Red Bull as well.
I think they're the biggest winners of the Monaco Grand Prix, really, more than anything in terms of championship prospects.
And I think if someone said to them as well, sorry, that they who do you want to win today? If you couldn't win, who do you want to win today? I think Mercedes would have been the team they picked. They're the least threat out of the big teams, I think, for the rest of the season. So they're not going to want to see Ferrari or Lotus winning, because I think they're still in good stead to pick up points later on. But I think Mercedes look the weaker of those four to challenge them. So, like I say, that actually panned out quite well for Red Bull as well, I think.
Yeah, as is evident with Ferrari's reaction as well, in terms of it was a bad weekend. They know they've lost significant ground, because even in the early stages, every race matters, because you're talking about, if you look at Red Bull and Ferrari as potentially the two front runners, and then Lotus very closely behind in terms of the teams. One race could quite easily be the difference at the end of the day, and it's they may look back on these sort of races and wonder what could have been. Which is why they've taken it particularly hard, Ferrari, in my opinion, in terms of how it's been for them, especially with Massa crashing out as well. And I think.
So, do you think with Alonso as well, that how off the pace the car seemed today? Do you think that's signs of something to come, or do you think he actually? Because I know at one point on the radio they said we think you've got debris stuck in the front wing. Whether that is the case or not, I don't know. I don't think the car looked particularly fast all weekend, but do you think that's a sign of maybe other teams have gone forward in terms of development, and Ferrari have maybe not gone forward as far, or do you think this track just didn't suit their car and they'll be back as strong as they were next race?
I think it's more the track didn't suit the car, and I think I'd like to understand how a bit of debris can make such an impact. I mean, I know it can, but it depends where it is, and you've seen Kimi Räikkönen still get, was it second or third with a broken nose?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, we've seen bits hanging off of cars, and it's not had the same dramatic effect that it had to Alonso this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think we'll ever know, and there does tend to be, a highly protective mentality in certain teams to ensure that the blame isn't placed on drivers. So I mean, who knows? We'll have to see. But Red Bull will be the most happier, I think, and with the races that are coming up as well, they can only get stronger.
Yes. And I think saying about Ferrari as well, I think they may need to have a little look around their car as well in terms of safety as well, because Massa having two identical crashes over the weekend as well. And the first one was blamed by Ferrari on driver error, and the second one on a suspension failure. So I'm more inclined to say there's probably an inherent problem there, and that was two suspension failures rather than a driver error than a suspension failure. So maybe they've got a little bit of a design flaw in that car that they need to address as well. Right, that brings us to the end of the podcast, and all that's left to do is let you know how you can get in touch with us if you want. The first way will be via email, and our email address is podcast@lightsoutracing.co.uk. You can follow us on Twitter. We are @lightsoutracing. And you can join our forums, which are live at www.lightsoutracing.co.uk. So I definitely encourage you to go over to the forums and sign up there, because of course you can submit stories to get on the podcast, and vote on the news stories as well that you'd like to see there. So we're always up for participation from anyone that listens, and we welcome all the questions. So all that's left to do now is play the outtakes. It was quite a strange accident he had there. It seems as if it was either a complete lock-up or lack of steering, but he was just unable to avoid getting out of the barriers in
Prasad.
Right, so on to the next.
Bloody hell. Okay, so now. Sorry.
So now.
No.
So yep, and other. Resort, where are we? And we had the win. I shall have a pause. I won't swear, and then I'll go back in.
Okay, so now to qualifying 3, and hang on.
One for the outtakes.
Good start. One for the outtakes. Yep.